Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session this morning. I'm going to date myself a little bit. Back in 2011, I was exposed to a report by our speaker today, Scott Brinker, who had the guts to tackle this basically the Martech stack. And at that point, we think, oh, 2011, how much of a stack was there? So I'm going to embarrass Scott. And this is our Martech stack in 2011. You're like, oh my God, look at all the companies. And a year later, Scott and I happened to be both working at the Cambridge Innovation Center by MIT, and it was the highest concentration of startup companies in the world. Think of it as the original WeWork without the baggage. And so Scott and I get introduced because we both worked there. And when we got talking, it was clear that Scott wasn't just doing a taxonomy of the landscape, he was actually interpreting it for us. He was helping us understand the journey, which was, for me, absolutely fascinating. And it's going to lead to today's topic, which is redefining Martech on how AI is transforming your tech stack. But since then, I became a big fan, and Scott, I'm going to embarrass you again. And his last report in 2024, you're not going to be able to see this. And these are just all dots. So the 2011 report would probably fit in right there. So now it's amazing. And he's also doing a lot of collaboration with Franz Riemersma, and who's helping him write the report. But what was really fascinating with the last report, we can't ignore the AI beast in the room. But I found the report, and when I spoke with Scott, a little bit disturbing. It talked about the potential of AI, but I left there, fairly uncomfortable because the application of AI, what marketers are doing, what sales executives are doing, we could all raise our hand and say, hey, we're all doing AI right now, but we haven't seen anything yet. That's why this report is so incredibly timely. And this is unlike the previous reports. This one really, takes a different approach. And you folks will be receiving a link to the report. As well as Scott's slides. So don't feel you have to do screen captures and things like that. We're going to be providing everything. We're also going to be recording this particular session. So what I want to do is I want to introduce Scott. I'm going to give a little bit of a background. So if you don't know Scott, we're going to have a subscribe link. Subscribe to Scott's newsletter. It's the one thing that goes to my primary inbox and not my junk inbox in Gmail. So that's good. Scott, that's my tribute. Whoever can make the primary is good. So Scott's a leading authority in the MarTech industry, known for expertise in navigating the intersection of marketing, technology, and strategy. You may also know Scott as a VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot, and he's the editor of the renowned Chief MarTech blog. He's been at the forefront of MarTech innovation for over a decade, and he's the creator of the annual MarTech Landscape Super Graphic, which we talked about, and like a turbo graphic now. And he talks about the explosive growth and how it all fits together. Big time speaker. If you haven't seen Scott speak, he's terrific. If you haven't met Scott, he is a terrific guy as well. So it makes it much interesting. And I think you'll enjoy his presentation today. So a little bit, if you have questions, in the old days, we used to basically say, save your questions to the end. Knowing this crew and knowing the topic, either raise your hand, add it to the chat. PMI and the team will be filtering and taking a look at what makes sense, coordinating. So we'll be handling questions along the way. So without further ado, Scott, I'm going to invite you to make us all optimistic and uncomfortable at the same time. I'm basically strapped in here, so it's all you.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Far too kind intro, Rob. Pam, whole Slammy crew here. Thanks for inviting me to chat with you. I think the way Rob described this, optimistic but uncomfortable, sort of is the state I feel like I'm now constantly living in with all of this stuff here. So I brought a absolute crap ton of slides, and we're not gonna like go through all of those. What I figured I would do is let me just share the deck. And as Rob mentioned, you'll get a copy for this full deck, and you can also get the full report. So yeah, anything we don't cover today, which will probably be most of it, you can yeah, catch up on your own. And I'm also happy to, chat with folks afterwards as well too. But the report that Rob mentioned was this Martech for 2025 report that Franz and I published back in December. We've been doing this now every year for a few years where, trying to not get carried away with predictions. You always know, like, December is like prediction season. Everyone's predicting, okay, this is, yeah, the 10 things that are going to change your life and help you lose weight in the year ahead. But rather we just try and use it as an opportunity to assess, like, okay, where do we actually think things are? And so, of course, yeah, given this past year, a lot of that was AI. And I think just as a setup for today's conversation, it's worth recognizing a couple things. First of all, man, kudos to Gartner and their hype cycle. Boy, have we all gotten some mileage out of this. We know there is just crazy hype around AI. But one of the important things I think we all have to keep in mind is while there is hype, there is also an underlying technology here that is advancing, and relative to technological advances we've seen over the past few decades, this one is actually moving the fastest yet. It also gets a little bit further complicated because it's not really one hype cycle. There isn't just the hype cycle of AI. What we've got is we've got like dozens and dozens of different things that are being enabled with AI, and each one of them kind of has their own hype cycle and is at, different stages. I suspect there's a number of you who are already using, if you're in marketing, right, you probably have a bunch of the tools you already have that have been leveraging machine learning, for some of your predictive analytics, everything from, segmenting customers and building audiences to churn risk and things like this. So, I mean, actually, there's a bunch of AI we already consider largely mature. Maybe content generative AI stuff, we're starting to figure out where we can use that, where we can't, and then there's other things like agents. Everyone's talking agents now that are definitely going up the hype cycle. And so I guess I wanted this framing for it because this is the challenge for us, is how do we balance not getting carried away with the hype, because we can waste a lot of time and money, getting ahead of the curve on that, but at the same time not being cynical about the actual technologies that are at a place where we can harness it productively and drive innovation in our teams. And there, I don't know if any of you follow Ethan Mollick. If you don't, this is pitch. Follow him before you follow me. Much smarter guy. He's a professor of marketing at Wharton, and for the past couple years, he's kind of like risen in the field as the guy out there who is like constantly like looking at different use cases for generative AI and these LLMs and what's possible and what's not. And he does a generally weekly newsletter on this stuff that's very readable, very practical. He had a quote a few months ago that really stuck with me, which is, we are absolutely at a place where if AI development completely stopped today, we would still have 5 to 10 years of rapid change, absorbing the capabilities of current models and integrating them into organizations and social systems. And then the punchline is, yeah, I don't think development is going to stop, though. And it clearly has not. So with that as the setup, I've got, well over an hour's worth of, potential content we could talk about. And I want to put this as a vote to you. Some of the topics we could talk about is I could dive into what's happened with the MarTech landscape over the past year, in particular, going deep on like, okay, for generative AI use cases, we did a survey of a few hundred, marketers of, okay, across that whole landscape, where are you actually using AI? Where are you using it now regularly? Where have you sort of toyed with it? What have you, tried and decided to stop using? Of course, this is something that, like, the moment we publish that data, it's instantly out of date. So, but happy to go in and share some of that. We could also talk a little bit about the battle of the ages, in the MarTech landscape between the incumbents, the Salesforces, the Adobes. I've been told HubSpot is now an incumbent, and how they're approaching AI. And then this massive explosion of startups, some of whom are looking to compete with and disrupt the incumbents, but also a huge number of them that are actually complementary. And we can talk through a little bit of that structure. There's a pretty wild topic that if you wanted to, brace yourself for, a Thursday morning, we could talk a little bit about getting beyond commercial software because some of the stuff that AI is enabling here of powering the ability for, frankly, people to build more and more custom software into their business operations. And this is partly where we can talk a little bit about agents. We can talk a little bit about this movement from software as a service to services software. And then, yeah, if you are feeling that you'd like to go a little bit deeper on the, nerdy technical stuff, we've also got some like architecture content we can talk about of the actual stack architecture and foundation, supporting this. So maybe let me pause there for a moment. And here, I'll get out of this mode so you can see this is our random collection of slides. And I don't know, Rob, Pam, do you want to, one of you act as the moderator for
Yeah,
which topic should we go to? And by the way, if there's a topic you want to talk about that I didn't list, bring it on. I am yours for this hour.
yeah, happy to, Scott. And I think, as Scott alluded to, I think everybody on this call has been dealing with their tech stack for a long time. If anybody says their tech stack is great and fully functional, I'll say that you're lying, because we've all had our challenges there. But the concept of custom code and all of a sudden taking not necessarily stack components, but creating our own, I think is a powerful piece that I think needs some analysis. So, folks, feel free to chime in, add to the chat if you feel there's something else. If you're petrified that
Hey,
your existing tech stack investment is dead, Scott, you can probably cover that too.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
it's not dead.
Gretchen, yeah, Gretchen has a post, which I bet, given the Sammy audience, having to do with what's going to have the biggest impact on the pipeline. I think that's probably near and dear to a lot of the hearts in this room. So that might be an area to hone in as well, Scott.
Yeah. And Mark just added, and this is important, which AI tools will become products we talk about in the future. Um, that'll be interesting given the number of startups. And Scott, you and I mentioned at one point, we have the startups and we also have the incumbents doing AI. Where do you think that'll end up? So these are some of the things worth covering.
All right. Well, then how about this? How about I'll dive real quickly into the Martech landscape, and then we'll talk a bit about the Gen AI use cases, because this is what's actually applicable here today towards getting stuff done. And then I'll do a quick bridge into like, okay, those are all commercial products. Talk a little bit about those dynamics, but then we will come into I'll give you an example of this. We don't call it custom software. We actually call it instant software. And I think you might find it fascinating. And for better or worse, I think it's going to be more relevant to you this year than you might imagine. But how about we start there? That'll probably maybe take us about 20 minutes or so, and then still leave plenty of time to like take this in any other direction that you want or follow-up questions. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, and I'm going to stick in this mode just because it's then easier to jump around, if that's good by you. So this is the completely unreadable chart that Rob showed earlier. My advice is never look at this again. The semi more readable version is just understanding from a total like growth of commercial products in the market. We thought after the pandemic, we were kind of leveling out with the total number of Martech products because there is consolidation. Companies get acquired, companies go out of business, new startups are always coming in, but it felt like we were starting to reach equilibrium. This past year with AI, boy, it just disrupted that all to hell. AI on so many dimensions has both empowered people to create software even faster, and also it's opened up a whole bunch of interesting new use cases and opportunities for innovation. And those two things combined, we ended up seeing like like a massive leap from like 11,000 to 14,000 solutions. And I won't go into it deep, but it is important to always recognize, that graphic is not a good representation of the industry. A much better representation is looking at it, by market share, relative size. There's a very small number of companies, them all, who are, in the head of the Martech industry. These are the major platforms that are usually the anchors to your tech stack. You probably have a number of companies, what I call in the torso, that tend to be like category leaders. I don't know, like say ad tech, you might be using like the Trade Desk or, Stack Adapt or, something like that. And then the vast majority of those 14,000 products are actually things in the long tail. And they're all these combination of like new startups. They're things that are specialized for particular uses. They might be an ecosystem add-on. They might be a vertical market solution. And this is actually where we saw the vast majority of these like new AI-powered tools come up. And just looking at, for a moment, the supply side, the vast majority of the new companies we saw were all doing things around content marketing. Not surprising, you've probably seen a ton of these. But it is interesting that it started to proliferate last year through, things in sales, in social media, ways in which we're getting better at leveraging this stuff in, CMSs, web experience, DXPs. And so definitely starting to see it proliferate throughout the whole MarTech landscape. One of the reasons I don't have an AI category on the landscape is because AI is just proliferating through every category. So the more relevant question is like, okay, well, that's great. That's the supply side. But what on the demand side, like, for you as marketers, like what's actually getting used? And again, I suspect the top level data here won't be surprising to you either. The vast majority of places where we're seeing it being used is content, in particular ideation. Everyone feels pretty safe here with using things like, Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini and whatnot, as brainstorming partners. And they're actually terrific at that, and so this is starting to become fairly mainstream. It's also playing a pretty big role in the content production pipeline. There's some data from some other reports I can track down. We won't have it here, but you know this, right? I mean, the effort in both time and money and largely just labor required to produce content. There's the idea, and there's the final delivery stage, but in between that is just a fair amount of slogging work. And this is actually where we're starting to see more and more of these content production tools. I mean, if you're doing stuff with like audio or video, things like Runway. So a lot happening there. The other place where we're starting to see things, I would say we aren't seeing a lot of it on the advertising side yet, outside of what actually, Google themselves, is actually doing. But the other category that's really interesting is leveraging Gen AI to actually get more insights out of data. Now, if we weren't talking about AI, which is completely drowned out every other conversation, the thing we would all be sitting around the table being most excited about is the evolution of the data layer inside marketing, and for that matter, inside the company. Like we're getting to a place where two big trends. One is this movement towards things like cloud data warehouses or data lakes, lake houses, is we're getting away from this challenge of having all this data in all these different silos to increasingly being able to get data in a place where it's accessible, initially for analytics, but also increasingly now for like feeding it back into operational execution. That is now starting to get to a universal data layer. Your mileage may vary, people at different stages here, but that direction has been where we're headed. The other thing that's very exciting here, and this is where Gen AI has actually proven to be the catalyst, is a huge amount of the data that we have is unstructured data, right? It's all these, calls that people have had with clients. It's the emails. It's, long form responses to surveys. It's, things, that have come in our like community threads or, all of this. And to be honest, we haven't really been able to harness that data, inside marketing. Gen AI is remarkably good at synthesizing that data and delivering out insights. And so one of the areas where we're now seeing, increasing Gen AI adoption or AI tool adoption, in marketing is tools that are actually helping us be able to get this insight out of this data that we have. Again, there's a nice flywheel effect here as we start to get more of the data universally available in things like lakehouses, and now we have these Gen AI tools that help us pull insights out of that. If you aren't yet experimenting with some of the things in this space, I definitely recommend taking a look.
Yeah, hey Scott, just a point on that. During our prep call, we covered the topic of data, and I actually expressed some anxiety over, do we have to clean up the data first before we go after this? And Scott, you said no, not at all. That tends to be, maybe the wrong approach. And so given that we have so much data, so much is unstructured, is there any work that a little bit of work that we do have to do beforehand to get to the data that you're referencing?
Yeah, yeah. I may have misled you a bit. It's not that we still don't have work to do on cleaning data. We do have, yeah. But that being said, again, the reason Gen AI is so good at unstructured data, and to be honest, even messy structured data, it can sort of look at in that same way as it looks at unstructured data, is it's just very good at being able to distill the forest for the trees. And so even if you have data challenges, and I don't know, can we have a show of hands of anyone who doesn't have data challenges? And we can like put a wreath, a laurel on you. Yeah, even if you have data challenges, that's actually not as much of a barrier to taking advantage of some of these Gen AI tools for getting value out of that data, which is exciting. So there's the things that people are going to use. I'm not going to go too deep in this data because, again, these are all pretty clear charts and you'll have all of those. But I did want to talk very briefly here about, this structure of different companies in this. And I think this is relevant partly because you're making choices as to like which AI tools to bring in. There's a lot of talk in the space about like, okay, these AI tools are going to completely disrupt, Salesforce, HubSpot, Adobe. The truth is just it's complicated. And I think the general narrative that you'll hear repeated is this is the age-old battle between will startups get distribution before the incumbents actually get innovation. And I think one of the things that's really exciting at this moment in time is, boy, there's not an incumbent in your stack that isn't leaned in deeply into AI. And so this is a very interesting battle happening between the challengers and the incumbents. But the thing is, the vast majority of these new AI tools actually aren't looking to displace Salesforce or HubSpot or Adobe or Braze or Zeta. Like, take your pick, your favorite, marketing platform there. Many of them are augmenting or complementing, just again, as Rob mentioned, I also run HubSpot's tech ecosystem. I've seen an incredible explosion of new AI companies that have been building integrations to HubSpot. And when we surveyed marketers, for the different cases they were using, we're asking them like, okay, well, are you using embedded AI tools, in your existing products? Are you bringing in new tools? Vast majority were saying, actually, we're using both. We're using new features that are coming out in our incumbent platforms. We're also experimenting with some of these indie tools. So I'm going to skip over more of the data there because what I want to get to is something that sort of blew my mind. So the whole Martech landscape has all been focused on commercial apps. And there's always been custom software in marketing and business in general, but as a percentage of the amount of technology there, it's been relatively small because frankly, it's been a real pain in the ass to build it, to maintain it. What we're starting to see here is this next AI generation is changing the equation of how easy it is to build and maintain and deploy custom software. And I know you might be skeptical about this. You should be skeptical about it, but I want to give you an example. All right. This was just like a couple months ago. I asked ChatGPT, please create a stacked area chart of the market cap of the 10 most valuable companies in the world for each year from 2000 to 2024. I want you to categorize them by tech companies versus all other categories. comes back with this lovely graph, kind of what you expected, right? The yellow is the tech, the orange is the non-tech. Kudos to Mark Andreessen. I don't know about software eating the world, but it clearly ate the stock market. We would agree this did not take any sort of like software engineering skill on my part to get this graph. Well, if you actually, in ChatGPT, there's a little icon that was like, okay, wait, how did this thing actually get produced? It got produced because ChatGPT actually wrote and executed a Python program to pull this together, get data together, synthesize it, execute out, a graphing library out of Python. And actually, had I not gone to click on that little icon, I would have had no idea that a software program had been written on my behalf or executed on my behalf. And this is where things are going to get really interesting because, well, you've probably heard about how for people who are software developers, they're using things like the GitHub Copilot, and there's things like Cursor and Replit. There's all these AI tools to help software developers be much more efficient and effective in writing software. And that is expanding the amount of software being written. But the really wild thing, is this example I gave is the beginning of this trend where you start to see people that are, frankly, they're creating software, we'll put it in quotes, without even realizing that they're creating software. And I know you can say like, okay, come on, Scott. I mean, like writing a little graph, that's not real software, right? I mean, that's just a simple thing, but as you read in the report, if you download it later, this is the classic way in which disruptive innovation, the way Clay Christensen, had studied it, appears, is it basically comes in because it starts serving these low-end use cases that frankly, professional software engineers would have never wanted to spend time writing a program to do a graph for my presentation, but like, these low-end use cases that have been largely underserved. And I know a lot of you probably have a ton of things like, boy, I wish I could get this analysis, or, oh, I wish I could like automate this thing over here. Probably have a ton of things that you wish ran better or faster or easier for you, but they weren't worth the level of like, oh yeah, let me go track down the IT team, or, can I hire some software developers to help me build this? As you start to get this AI technology, these agent technologies that can actually do more and more of that bidding for you. Yeah, it's going to start with the low-end use cases. But the thing about all these disruptive innovation curves like this is they keep getting better over time. And in the case of AI, it's actually getting better at a rate that, again, it's just nothing we've ever seen before. And so,
So Scott, can I to
yep.
this is a huge topic. The in the success of this in firms is going to be tied to what they do with their marketing org chart. Okay, your average, because suddenly we can get the feedback. I think your example with Python code is really important. We got that graph and now we need to modify it, and we may need some tech skills. What are you seeing? How is this going to affect how we build our marketing organizations, and who do we staff it with? Because I think the true power here is are we going to need some tech skills, even though we're kind of throwing, we're doing our own automated custom code. Does it actually increase the amount of tech support that we need?
It's fascinating. So I will be the first to say these changes are so significant and they're happening so quickly that I am not even going to pretend to predict exactly how this will shape out over the next 5 years. And if someone else can, odds are they're selling you something. But I will say this. I think this is where having a good marketing ops team is incredibly valuable. I mean, we know it's been valuable here for the past 10 years, but in many ways, they are going to be the level of bridge that you need between like core IT infrastructure, which is also continuing to grow, things like that universal data layer and whatnot. A lot of that's being driven by IT. Marketing's going to be the beneficiary of a lot of that capability. I think, it's funny that Python example. I guarantee you, if I went back to that, in fact, you should experiment with this yourself, try recreating that. And then you say, no, this isn't what I want. Can you like get this other data, move it? It'll just go ahead and it'll keep iterating. And I guarantee you could go through an entire dialogue of evolving, that data analysis without ever once realizing that any software was being written at all. But there is going to be a set of things where like, okay, it does start to blend into like, the architecture of our digital operations. And I agree with you, in the near future, we do not want, every marketer to basically be able to reshape our entire, digital ops workflow. But this is where I think your marketing ops team can just have so much leverage and so much power, because now they don't have to be hardcore engineers. What they simply need to be is like good stewards of understanding, how are we shaping these workflows? How are we shaping the data that's being managed throughout this? And do it in a way that's both, on one hand, relevant to the marketing organization, because that's who they serve, but at the same time, savvy enough about good tech stewardship that they're not letting this stuff just go wild.
Yeah. Scott, we have a question, a forward-looking question from Mark. Which indicators will tell us that software will survive the AI shakeout? Ooh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, again, this depends on, has been the case with the Martech landscape for years. A lot of this comes down to, what do you want to define as software? I mean, was this thing software? I'm kind of making a big deal of it to try and make a point, but I actually think most people wouldn't consider this software, right? Because again, most of it wouldn't even know like a Python thing had been written. And so I do think we're getting to a place where both the amount of, let me see if I can use another word for this, the amount of digital orchestration and automation and intelligence that's running throughout our business is going to expand tremendously. Is that going to expand in a wider number of commercial software products that we use? My sense is probably not. In fact, if I had to predict, and I disclaim this like anyone predicting the future in this world is taking a big risk. So I say this with massive caveat, but if I had to predict, what I expect we're going to see is the commercial software in our stack is probably peaking. And in fact, if anything, it's probably going to continue to try and consolidate. I do still think there will be strong need for commercial software as like the foundation. There's a lot of like heavy duty lifting that happens with things like that data layer, and underlying like orchestration platform for all these different agents and other things going on. There's a lot of real value there. You don't want to have to be like recreating the wheel with. But I think what we are going to start to see is, on top of that commercial foundation, the number of things that are quote unquote custom software, just agents and workflows and automations and things that we start implementing without even thinking of them as custom software. I think that's really where you're going to see the massive amount of growth. All right, so, oh, and there was one last thing. I'll just leave this slide and then we can jump to questions or other directions. And thank you for bearing with me. I don't know if this qualifies as the nerdiest Sammy session in the group's history, but it's going to be in the top 5. So thanks for bearing with a Martech nerd here. There's one other piece of this landscape that's, you're hearing more and more about, and this is this idea of services as software, which is, instead of just buying seats for a particular commercial app, there are increasingly these things that are being packaged where, oh, I outsource to this agent, software, whatever, to deliver a certain outcome for me, and then I am paying per outcome. The most common example we're seeing right now is some of the stuff with like customer support interactions. And if you look at a company like Sierra AI, they're sort of one of the poster childs for that. This is going to be a little bit of a complicated thing. This is why invest in your marketing ops team, give them a lot of love, because they're going to be the ones who are helping you balance all these different kinds of flavors of technology that you're able to leverage in your operations. I think the one seed I would just plant is, when you look at this map and you're like, oh my God, this is just getting more complex. How can we even sustain that level of complexity? I think there are 2 things that are actually going to move it in the other direction. The first is even while the underlying technology gets more complex, the user interface through AI is one of the first things that's happened in, frankly, software UI in like 2, 3 decades that actually is helping us simplify. Getting to this mode where we do more and more of our interactions with software through natural language instead of having to learn the incantations of, menus and clicks and configuration buttons and stuff like that. It's a huge leap forward. I think you're going to see a ton of progress there over these next couple years. The other thing that's really interesting is all of these different technologies, if you go way down to the bottom of the stack, they're all being run on these hyperscalers like AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. And while we haven't yet seen a lot of activity around that, I think the fact that you've got so much of this disparity, but at somewhere there is a common technological layer. I think over this next 5 years, you will start to see the hyperscalers also providing some ways to make it easier for you to govern and get more value out of that entire ecosystem. So, all right, with that, oops, here we
So
go.
Scott, I'm gonna jump on the G word that you used. We talk about governing. We start intersecting with data privacy, and right now we've got this incredible data layer. What are the implications, especially in Europe, for leveraging customer data somehow, and possibly not in the right way?
I mean, again, this would be the challenge. This would be a challenge without AI. And the thing that is both because we're now getting more data, we're using more data, we're starting to get more flow of data. On one hand, that would make it a challenge. On the other hand, this thing about getting to a universal data layer, one of the other benefits of it was it finally would start to give us the visibility and a centralized place where we could put a chokehold, a control on how data flows and how it evaluates. And so this is, again, all this stuff is work in progress, but if you look at companies that are focused on governance around the data layer, it's about like, how do we make this more organized? How do we put more, compliance guardrails around this stuff? And the thing that is then promising about that is a lot of these AI tools, it's going to be that data layer that is feeding them, or to the degree that they are then collecting data, they're going to ultimately be pushing it back down into that layer as well, too. Again, not to say there aren't, again, lots of exceptions here on the edge. It's just a very messy time on this. But I think if we're looking for salvation and how do we, get our arms around, managing data right, it's that universal data layer. And the great thing about this, by the way, investing in that is unlike AI, which is very it's where we started with like, hype cycles and this, and it's like really hard to predict like which tool is going to go where and what's going to shake out. The stuff that's happening at the data layer right now is become pretty well established. And while it still has, further to go to mature, there's actually much less risk in investment in that direction. And even if you did absolutely nothing with AI, being able to take advantage of that universal data layer for even powering today, like your own analytics, or being able to use it to power some of your manually configured, like, marketing automation and whatnot. There's like a ton of value you can get out of that. But you get this added bonus that actually it's pretty clear that data layer will also be the thing that's the place of leverage for what we end up doing with a lot of AI.
Terrific. So we got, and Pam, we'll jump into some questions. I want to hit Scott with one more. Every organization that I meet with, CMOs and VPs of sales, a lot, and all of them admit that their CEOs and their bosses are hammering them to use AI to get better results. And these are smart people, so it's not like they're clueless and thinking, let me just go into Chat GPT. But how would somebody, and especially the folks on this call that have to report into a CEO, what you've presented here, and then, by the way, the use cases, I think you had content right at the top of the list, and ultimately that's nothing more than a commodity, and we'll all have content. We have to get down the stack in your interpretation of data. So if they're getting pressure, everybody on this call, where should they look after the call ends today? You presented some stuff here, but what would they be looking for to address their CEO's concerns? Where would you point them? And I know that's an open-ended question. It depends. I understand that, but are there any macro things that you think should be worth considering for everybody on this call?
Yeah. Well, let me push back on the content side here for a moment because, right, if you're thinking about using AI to just mass generate AI content, I don't think you're going to see a lot of value out of that. That is not actually how I see most marketers that are doing really good content with AI. They're still the ones that are like driving like, okay, what would be an amazing piece of content that our audience would love? And they might do the brainstorming with some of these AI tools, to, come up with that idea. But where they're largely leveraging AI is to say like, okay, if it used to take, 3 weeks and $40,000 to produce that amazing piece of content and the accompanying videos and, the little like snippets we'll put all over social media for it. Oh, actually now I can collapse that production space down to a week and $5,000. And that's a huge, huge thing. Now, it doesn't take the pressure off of you still have to have the concept of what is that amazing piece of content. Nobody wants to read like just pure AI generated slop, but like getting like great pieces of content. And I know you probably get this yourself. You come across things you're like, wow, that was actually a really great thing. That was helpful for me as usual. Oh, that's exciting. I wanted to share that. That's still the job, and it's leveraging AI to increase that production. And since most of you then have like very clear baselines on both time and costs, associated with that historically, to be able to report up to, the C-suite of like, okay, this is where we've implemented it. This is the impact it's had, on the efficiency of this. And you might say, well, that's just an efficiency play. What about the innovation with AI? One of the single best things for us as marketers with AI is all right, I know this is such nerdy stuff. Thank you for bearing with me. There's something called the Pauling principle, which is a tribute to Linus Pauling, who was a Nobel Prize winning chemist. And one of the things that like he had said at one point is because he'd come up with all these, he had so many great ideas that turned out, to succeed. And so someone had asked him in an interview, like, how do you come up with all these like amazing ideas? And his answer was like, oh, well, I just come up with a whole bunch more ideas. The implication, actually, the vast majority of them are crap and they suck, but it's that ability to just like constantly explore new ideas that increases the odds of finding a subset of ideas that are really good. And our big challenge in marketing, I mean, we moved to the digital age. We expected, hey, that to dramatically accelerate our ability to do more experimentation, more exploring, and exploiting. But while it did make a leap forward, it sort of hit a wall where still the actual production costs for a lot of our ideas, has been the barrier of just how many things can we explore. And this is what's so exciting about AI, in my opinion, today for marketing, is by reducing the time and costs of being able to do some of this production, it's empowering us to explore a lot more ideas. And it's that increasing our ability to find out of the set of ideas that we experiment with, like, how do we find more winners? And I think you can then, again, look back historically, at the number of like innovation things that succeeded relative to the number you tried and then what you're able to do here in 2025 and actually be able to show a quantitative argument of how it's accelerating that impact.
Okay, perfect. I want to call out one of our audience members, Bob Britton. Feel free to chime in. Did this address some of your efficiency concerns, or do you have other thoughts here? Because you've been putting some questions out there for us.
My biggest concern is that organizations in general are looking at this right now as an efficiency tool, not necessarily an effectiveness tool. There's not a high correlation between efficiency and effectiveness. And what we're trying to do here in sales and marketing is help the customer be more effective. The customer could care less about which AI tools we're using to make ourselves more efficient. The customer is concerned about how can they be more effective. And that's getting lost in translation, I think, a lot of the times when it comes to AI. How is AI making the customer better? How is AI solving the human problem that the customer has? And that's something that we just always lose.
Yeah. Well, all right. Two things. So one, and it's a great question. I think that's the right question to be asking. The point I was making earlier here about like accelerating the explore versus exploit curve is ultimately, right, you're trying to find things that actually impact the customer, that they love, that it helps them. But the other one, I want to give this example because, all right, I know you all have gotten pitches and you've heard about these like AI SDRs, and it's like, oh yeah, we'll just have this agent, and the agent will take the incoming call, and and Bob, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably had the same reaction I had, which is, hell no. Like, this is not going to make life better for the customer. And actually, having a AI agent like harass the hell out of or say like, no, you weren't worth our time, so we handed you out for this agent is actually would seem very likely to have a negative impact, on both the customer and the company. And I agree with that. I was talking to one of the companies behind that, and they gave me a use case that suddenly changed my entire perception on that, which is, all right, and this is shifting a little bit more into the sales side of it. Salespeople have a hard friggin' job. And one of the hardest dimensions of this is they are selling, they're just asked so many questions. They are the interface to the customer. And yet, as everything is accelerating so much, I mean, the range of questions that a customer may have and the range of knowledge that a salesperson has in the moment to answer it, there's just a massive gap. And again, depending on your industry, the gap might be a little. I can say in some industries like software, the gap is gigantic. So I had always been thinking about this idea of, one of the obvious use cases of AI is for it to be on the seller's side, not even aware to the customer, but, basically dynamically, as the customer and the salesperson are talking, that conversation is being fed into a generative AI engine that's basically identifying off of keywords and surfacing up for the salesperson, like relative content and answers. Interesting. You still kind of imagine like, boy, that's got to be hard for that salesperson to be like, okay, I'm talking to you and I'm paying attention, but I'm reading this and I'm like, can I catch up? So one of these agent companies said like the use case they had found that was working really well was basically bringing the agent into the call with the salesperson and very explicitly. I don't know if any of you saw that TV series like The Good Place, and like the Janet, agent that would just show up. And so like experimenting with these sales calls would be the customer and the salesperson would have this agent Janet, that joined the call, who would normally just not say anything. But that at any point in time, a question came up, that the salesperson wanted to get an immediate answer. She said, like, hey, Janet, Mary has just asked about this. What can you tell me? And Janet is absolutely able to instantly come back and say, like, oh, well, this is the things you want to know. And then this is that, in a way that's actually very transparent to the customer. Again, will this work? How will it not work? How will different customers, I mean, lots of questions here, but that became one of the use cases that made me stop and think of like, as we start to evolve culturally, there may be a way that this stuff can actually both be very present in the conversation with the customer and actually be appreciated without it taking away from the fact that we also have a human who is really dedicated and is the primary person calling the shots.
Yeah, great point, Scott. In fact, I was working with one company down in Pennsylvania who said exactly what you did. They've got the hardest job in the world, and they're faced with questions that come from all sorts of areas, and oftentimes, as broad as they are, it's tough to answer. So we got time for one or two more questions. I want to call out one. EJ, you talked about the AI-centric marketing stack, not just Greenfield. Do you want to expand on that question a bit more for Scott?
Yeah, sure. So I think you were going to show a slide, Scott, that said that was going to go into the foundations of an AI-centric marketing stack. And not having seen the slide, I'm not a betting man, but I would assume that it's based on a greenfield stack. Like if you could do everything from the ground fresh up. But if you don't have that, and like many of us already have something in place, where is it that you would recommend to start?
Yeah. All right. So the good news is actually I don't have a slide that's basically like, yeah, this is the greenfield. These are all new products. The closest thing would be, this slide I was showing here, and I'll just bring this back up one more time. is I actually think the stacks today look mostly incumbent platform and a handful of indie tools. Maybe you're experimenting with one or two challenger platform. Most companies haven't yet adopted the services software implementations. Most of them, to the degree that we're starting to experiment with custom apps, it's still very much on the margin. And so the reason this is the case is there is almost no company other than like an absolute brand new startup, that just gets to like greenfield it. We're all dealing with, legacy, stacks. And I think the thing that is in our favor at the moment is unlike, for instance, if we think back to one of the last big revolutions of the cloud, and the whole on-premise versus the cloud craziness, the on-premise companies, software leaders, were actually very reluctant to go to the cloud. And they resisted it. They thought that, I mean, again, we still have this debate today about things like private cloud versus public cloud. But it was one of the things that there was enough of a window that it really did allow Salesforce, actually, right? They were one of the first champions of this. It allowed this cloud generation of SaaS to actually get much more acceleration ahead of the others. And that became a big problem for all the companies who had all these legacy investments in on-prem because they couldn't adopt the cloud stuff right away, but the on-prem stuff didn't evolve fast enough. That is not how things seem to be playing out here now. These incumbents, particularly in the Martech sales tech space, they are hell-bent. I mean, I guess everyone's read the disruptive innovation books. Everyone has seen this movie before. Them, the executives, their boards, they're like, the hell we're going to get disrupted this time. And so much innovation is happening with the incumbents that, frankly, if you adopted no other net new tools and you just took advantage of what I'm sure is the AI functionality coming out of your incumbent tools that you already have. Again, it's a little bit like that Ethan Mollick quote. I suspect there's actually more innovation, to take advantage of there than you probably actually even have like the change management bandwidth to take advantage of. So, I wouldn't be too worried about that at this point in time. I don't think that's the constraint.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Yeah,
And of course, I'm biased on this. I'm working now for one of the incumbents. So, if you ask someone from like, Day AI or, someone like that, they'd be like, no, throw all that crap out, get new stuff. But, so take it from a biased source.
Yeah. So Scott, thank you. We're coming up on our time. Yeah, I think everybody's a little bit, I'm getting some side notes as well. People are asking for a Scott Brinker bot. So when you put that together, and you can probably ask ChatGPT to do it, send us the Python code so Brinker bot can take over.
That was
Anyway,
the punchline. I actually am the Brinker bot.
I noticed something in that. What was a character back in the 80s, Max Headroom? So we haven't seen all the. So for you, Scott, and then we'll turn it over to Pam. Closing thoughts from you and things we should think about as we enter this crazy 2025 era.
Yeah, I'd just close by saying like this is all overwhelming, and the only thing I'd assure you is it's not you. Every single person I meet, including myself, is overwhelmed with the pace of this. And so the good news about that is you're probably not actually behind. And the only thing I know how to like navigate through this is take it a step at a time. And I think as long as you're in the mode where you're like, okay, we realize the world is changing, we're not going to put blinders on this, but we're also not going to whip ourselves into some sort of frenzy, and just be very thoughtful about, again, even from that last question, just starting with some of the new AI technologies that are available in the tools you have, or maybe like experimenting more with use cases and things like, Claude or ChatGPT. I think you'll see there's a lot of opportunity to advance, the practice of marketing this year, and don't get too worried about the fact that there's just way more happening out there in the world than any of us, can like fully wrap our arms around at this time.
All right, Scott, thank you very much. We're gonna, we'll be making both the slides and the report available. So, Scott, on behalf of everyone, I want to say thank you. But I want to turn it over to Pam. We got some stuff coming up. So, Pam, you for the close, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the link to the slides and the report, that is now in the chat. So we will leave that up for a couple of minutes. You can find that there, timestamped 8:59. We will also put it when we post the recording. So Scott, let me add my thanks. It was great to have you here today. I've been diving into the AI world in marketing. I feel overwhelmed, but I feel better knowing that you're overwhelmed, and super practical stuff for people to think about. I loved EJ's question as well, just to think about what to put in that stack and think about what questions to ask your current vendors. Ask them hard questions. I know that there's this AI fairy dust out there, but ask them the hard questions about how your incumbent platforms are going to help you with what you need to do, how you can get your job done better, faster, easier, more creatively. So the recording will be available next week in the meetup group, as well as these links that we have. Now, we do have 2 sessions coming up in February and March. They're not announced yet, so you will get announcements in the meetup group. On February 20th, we're going to have Rob Volpe, who's the CEO and founder of Empathy Activist, and he's going to be talking about the missing link in marketing, how empathy influences buyer behavior. So kind of a very interesting one, and I think that'll be a good one for everybody here as well. And then on March 20th, we have Joe McCluskey, and Joe is the SVP of Strategy and Growth and Data Analytics at EXL, and he's going to be talking about customer acquisition, practical ways to use data, Gen AI analytics, and addressable media to drive growth. So we will be touching back on that AI topic back in March. So watch the meetup group for announcements of those sessions. Thank you for being with us today. Scott, one final thank you to you, and we're going to wrap it up and invite you to have a great rest of your Thursday. Thanks for being here.